Welcome to the second new video format of Eye on Japan. In these videos, I'll analyze extensively one particular set of news or a relevant topic in the public discourse in the past week. This week's topic is Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's statements about his plans for the economy and a general overview of the Japanese economy and its problems. I also want to preface that I am no economist, so I might be a little imprecise or generic on some specific economical matters, but all the data and sources that I use to make this video are linked in the description, if any of you wants to check for themselves. Now, let's get to the news. In a news conference on January 4, Kishida described his very vague vision for a new capitalism where pay raises are the core part of a virtuous cycle of growth and redistribution, calling for companies to create an annual pay raise system that would outset the inflation rate. However, he did not describe any specific plans to do so, since the government doesn't have much range of action, and ultimately, the pay raises are left to the discretion of individual companies. Kishida also talked about a problem that has been haunting Japan for a long time, the declining birth rate, saying that the problem requires an other-dimensional response, whatever that means, and promised to present a framework for doubling the correlated budget between March and June, when the government, and especially Masanobu Ogura, minister in charge of child-related politics, will craft a policy to address the issue. The Prime Minister cited expanding the child benefits as one of the key measures to consider, a measure that is estimated to cost more than 1 trillion yen every year. Government sources expanded upon the measure on Tuesday, saying that its range would now apply to non-regular workers, self-employed, and freelancers, in a first attempt to recognize a society that changes. Sources also said that the budget could end up reaching several trillion yen, and that the government is considering raising premiums for employment, medical, and social insurances, or even raising taxes once more. And that's crazy, because the government still hasn't finalized its plans for the previous tax hikes. You will remember that Japan is now rushing to rearm itself. If you don't, go watch my last video on the matter. But as a brief recap, the government is switching to an aggressive preemptive military stance and outlined a plan to acquire counter-strike capabilities and other wonderful toys. To do so, it lifted the decades-long policy of limiting the defense budget at 1% of the GDP and increased it to 2% by 2027, a projected figure of 43 trillion yen. On the topic of the defense itself, Yōji Kōda, a retired vice admiral of the Maritime Self-Defense Force, said Japan's planned defense spending surge is leading to unrealistic projects that could conversely be detrimental to the protection of the nation. In addition, he said, the programs proposed so far would prove too much for the army to handle, and also that this new policy is creating such a huge pool of funds that various parties are rushing to grab their share, bypassing the usual realistic approach in procuring defense equipment. In my opinion, the increase in the defense budget is a sad but real necessity, but the way it's being proposed is dysfunctional and almost a complete turnaround from Japan's post-war pacifist stance. I would like to stress this concept because it rattles me to the bones. We are witnessing the end of the post-World War II peace era, a time of generalized peace between the developed countries, and a time when the pacifist constitution of Japan was envied and taken as model by pacifist activists around the world. And now it won't be like this anymore. But going back to the economic issue, to raise the budget for all of this, the government needs funds, and the only available source seems to be a tax hike. A government research panel said in rather vague terms that the tax would be raised at some point in 2024. More in detail, the plan to fund the defense budget seems to be raising corporate and income taxes and the one on cigarettes. But now you have to add everything we talked before. In April, the government is set to launch a new agency that will specifically oversee policies for children and families, and its new budget for 2023 will be 4.81 trillion yen. That figure is roughly equivalent to 2 percentage points of the consumption tax revenue, which is currently at 10%. Former LDP Secretary General Akira Amari, who now serves as a senior member of the LDP's Tax Policy Research Committee, stressed that this should be the government's course of action, stirring even more the already heated debate in his party. Raising the consumption tax to 12% would be devastating because although it gathers a lot of money, it slashes indiscriminately across the population, with high-income people not even fazed by it and low-income people being the most damaged, especially if those funds aren't rerouted towards social security, but towards narrow-scoped measures or defense spending. Which to me sounds like a zero-sum game, if not worse, especially considering the consumption tax hike, with the government taking 100 in taxes and giving back 50 to a restricted part of the population only if they get to bear the incredible burden of having one or more children. But this is not the reason for the heated debate, oh no. The debate is around how badly this will damage the party in the next election. As a matter of fact, the controversies that burst into the party were not much on the measure, but on how to finance them. I talked about this previously, but the other proposal inside the LDP was to finance the defense budget by issuing more bonds, and therefore accumulating more debt. This is because, being the LDP a right-wing liberal party, they thrive politically on the promise of low taxes for workers, and financially on low taxes for corporations, using the old lie of the trickle-down economy. And I call it a lie, not because it might work in the short term, but because, as we're seeing right now, it's not sustainable in the long run. Anyways, public surveys show a majority of voters are against higher tax rates for defense spending, while we are yet to see the reaction to the latest news. But all this talk about tax hikes could really bite the LDP back in the next elections. We are about to go into a big electoral period for Japan. The first to come up will be the unified local elections in spring 2023, which will be an indicator of how bad or not the population is reacting to the proposed tax hikes. Next up, the LDP presidential election, which is set for September 2024, and the House of Councillor elections, scheduled for the summer of 2025. After that, in a normal situation, there would be the next lower house general election in October 2025. But many in the governing party, including LDP policy chief Koichi Hagiuda, are calling for a snap election to seek a public mandate on tax hikes. Initially, when Kishida emphasized that the tax hike wouldn't take effect before 2024, many thought that he was trying to calm the public opinion in order to call snap elections, while the opposition was still scrambling, much like Shinzo Abe did in 2014. But after his statements on the child tax benefits and the prospects of new taxes, Kishida has been much more reluctant to talk about voting. So, to recap, in a scenario where wages won't go up, we have a proposed tax hike on corporations and wages, higher insurance premiums everywhere, and a 2 percentage points increase on sales taxes. And now the question becomes, is the Japanese economy strong enough to withstand the blow? And the answer is, I don't know. I'm not an economist and I don't have ESP, so I'm not going to make a prediction. But what I can do is describe you the situation in which Japan is right now. Last December, Tokyo's inflation rate outpaced forecasts to hit 4% for the first time since 1982, higher than the 3.8% that was predicted by the economists. Tokyo inflation rate is a leading indicator of the nationwide trend, and being it above predictions indicates that the prices are rising more than anticipated, indicating the possibility for a spiraling of the situation. Price rising, with the exception of fresh food, has also exceeded the Bank of Japan's 2% price target for 7 months. For instance, processed food prices jumped 7.5%. Over the first 4 months of 2023, prices will increase for roughly 7,000 items, up some 60% from a year earlier. A Teikoku databank official said that even though crude oil prices and the yen's weakening have eased, food producers still need to boost prices due to lower customers, which is supposedly the main reason behind the increase. A separate data report showed household spending declined for the first time in 3 months in November, indicating that the inflationary wave may be starting to eat into household spending. BOJ Governor Haruhiko Kuroda said the central bank will continue with monetary easing until Japan achieves its inflation goal on a substantial basis, supported by stronger wage growth. A potential source of support going forward is Kishida's economic stimulus package, which is worth 39 trillion yen in fiscal spending. But with tax hikes ahead, people may not feel encouraged to go back at spending. In addition, local economies are showing signs of suffering themselves. We have already talked about the shrinking of the economies of prefectures near Fukushima and the ones hit by the recent avian flu. But over the years, other prefectures had problems of their own, especially in relation to one tax program for local governments. A study by the Asahi Shimbun showed that the hometown tax program, designed to help struggling rural communities, instead caused serious damage to local governments in fiscal 2021. The program, introduced in 2008, is intended to support cash-strapped hometowns and other rural areas hit by depopulation and dwindling tax revenues by allowing people living in urban areas to donate cash to other local governments of their choice, in return for tax credits and thank you gifts of local specialties. The Asahi's calculations showed that 471 of the nation's 1,741 cities were left with deficits under the program. This way, 15% of Japan's towns and villages added to the ones already in the red, for a total of 27%, with the cities of Yokohama, Nagoya, and Osaka having the worst deficits. Most likely, donations are concentrated on a handful of local governments that can afford to offer these gifts, known as Furusato no Zei, while other local governments have not received a sufficient amount of donations to make the program worthwhile. In other words, expenses to buy, promote, and deliver gifts are proving too much for them. Hideaki Hirata, professor of business management at Hosei University, said local governments are fiercely vying with each other for a piece of the tax revenues, rendering it a zero-sum game. Municipalities can significantly reduce the value of the gifts, but that will likely make them less attractive to donors searching for good returns. To try and tackle the problem of remote areas depopulating and impoverishing, the government is adopting a plan first introduced in the town of Ama in Shimame Prefecture, and therefore called the Shimame Model. The program aims to promote the creation of new employment opportunities and migration to regional areas by courting urban young people and offering them multiple jobs depending on the season as a way to resolve worker shortages. The idea is that since different industries, like the lodging and the agricultural one, have a need for workers mostly in different seasons, workers are sent to different work sites for several months at a time. Based on the town's initiatives, the Internal Affairs Ministry introduced the program in June 2020. The problem is that after working for several years under this program, young people are urged, meaning forced, to find fixed employment and live in the town, which is not really an incentive at that point, it's coercion, and won't solve long-standing depopulation trends nor the impoverishment of rural areas without an overhaul of their employing appeal. But the most severe economic issue for Japan has been the same one for decades, which is the ever-worsening aging of the population. According to Statista, in 2021, Japan had a negative population growth of 0.46%, and if we exclude Monaco, the country ranks first for the highest percentage of over 65 people. The reasons for this negative trend are many, including the absurd social pressure and rules that are stifling the younger generation's ability to create any kind of romantic relationship. But as a rule of thumb, wealthy nations having aging societies is nothing new. Researchers warned about the risk for decades, but very few governments have been listening. As a general trend, populations across East Asia are declining, and fewer young people enter the workforce. with old people increasingly toiling well into their 70s and beyond. In this already bad scenario, demographers have defined Japan as a super aging society. For obvious reasons, an aging society is something extremely bad for the economy. With a shrinking workforce, surveys show that as many as half of Japanese companies report shortages of full-time workers. And with no one to pay for their pensions, older employees desperately need to work. The adopted solution seemed to be making older people work till the day they die, with companies abolishing mandatory retirement, funds for companies to adapt to older people's necessities in the workplace, and the appearing of HR companies that deal specifically with old people looking for jobs. In this situation, the ratio of older people choosing to work is more than 1/4. If you ask me, this is absolutely ridiculous. Governments around the world have been trying to convince people to give birth in any way possible, with very poor results. All in the attempt to avoid the easiest, most efficient, and reasonable solution to all this, which is opening the borders and creating large-scale immigration plans. Japan is one of the nations most resistant to both legal and illegal immigration, and much to many people's amusement, this is biting them back hard. We will see to which point their economy will have to crumble to make them accept the idea that having new blood flow into your country is beneficial to everyone. And this was all for this week. This video is going to be incredibly long, but it was worth it. I'm still trying to create a new workflow that allows me to make this double series of videos in time, so you might expect a hiccupy production in the near future. As always, thank you for watching my content, and if you like my videos, please leave a comment, like, and subscribe. See ya!